Hello, everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today we're doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which sees Smile 2 get its release. This is, of course, a follow-up to the very successful first Smile movie, which had some mixed reactions from horror fans. I myself found it to be pretty compelling. I thought that it was very, very effective in the scares of it and freaked me the heck out. I am also typically not someone who is a horror fan, and so I have no plans to see Smile 2, though it is interesting that they're going to continue on this story, and they're obviously hoping for another success just like the last film did, which was a bit of a surprise, to be perfectly honest, because I don't think anyone expected the first Smile to do as well as it did, but clearly the marketing for that movie was quite effective. We'll see if they're able to have the same type of effectiveness this time around with the sequel. We also have strong holds once again for The Wild Robot. This movie, as I have mentioned in previous videos, I do think is going to be able to leg out to a point where it'll be able to make some of its money back. However, we of course do need to keep on following those international numbers, because whereas it's doing very, very well domestically, internationally it's doing okay, and it's going to really depend on how it does in certain markets over there. And also there's certain markets it is not yet released in either internationally, and so of course that will also have an impact. But what we can say is that this movie is doing very well domestically and has already, or is about to, cross $100 million domestically, as I had predicted would happen within the course of the next couple of weeks, and that is going to be happening this weekend. Terrifier 3 also is expected to hold, and either going to be a very strong hold, as is being predicted by the likes of Box Office Report. We'll get to that one in a second, but also even according to Box Office Theory, even in a worst case scenario, we're talking about a pretty strong hold, and at least significantly better than the kind of hold that you saw for Joker 2, which once again is expected to have another massive drop-off. So after a historic drop in the 80% range, around 81% from first to second weekend, now in its third weekend expected to drop another 63%. These are just awful numbers for this, but ultimately it's a pretty slow box office weekend, with the number one film being Smile 2, and we'll go ahead and dive into these numbers right now. $22.9 million is what is currently being projected for Smile 2, so a pretty strong showing for this movie. And obviously we are dealing here with a sequel. We'll go ahead and do a quick search on this because we love doing things here live on OMB Reviews. Helps me stay honest. So this movie, being the follow-up, cost around $28 million to make, so having a domestic opening of projected to be $22.9 million, again, that's pretty good. That's a fine opening. We'll go ahead and actually dive into some of these numbers right here. Let's go ahead and pull up the numbers.com, in fact, just to give us an idea of where things are, just so, again, we can do all these things in real time. As you can see, the opening weekend for that film was around $22.6 million, and that was back in 2022. So this is going to be a decent opening for it. Really not an amazing one, because typically when you have sequels to films, if you want to try to build your audience, you would expect the opening weekend for this movie to be a little bit higher. Part of me wonders if maybe it's because no one was really asking for a sequel to Smile, because there was that mixed reaction, especially amongst those in the horror film community. Again, as I'd mentioned, there are some who are much more passionate about horror films than I am, and so there were many who were very critical of the first film as just not being all that scary, as being a little bit by the numbers, and so therefore not being as effective there. And so I imagine many of them who may have had interest in the first movie maybe don't have as much interest this time around. Also, when you see a film like this be able to not really build upon its opening weekend compared to the first film of the franchise, it also means that marketing is not nearly as effective. One of the things that really was able to be powerful about the first Smile movie, as you can see right here, made over $217 million worldwide, over $100 million domestically, was because it was able to hold pretty well, was able to get a lot of general interest in the movie over time, right? We saw an 18% hold, for instance, in the first to second weekend drop-off. So that was because you had a initial showing, right? You had initial numbers coming out of people who just wanted to see what the movie was about, and then because of good word of mouth on the film, because of intrigue being built by the kind of more natural grassroots campaign of how they were, relying on their marketing, essentially relying on word of mouth, only dropped 18%. That's a very strong hold for almost any movie, let alone for a horror film like that. Typically, horror films today have a stronger opening weekend because people are like, hey, I want to see a horror film, let's go ahead and do this, and then a pretty significant drop-off in the weeks following that. That's not what happened with the first Smile. It actually ended up holding pretty strong there, 18%, 32%, 33%. So again, very, very strong, and was able to leg out quite a bit. In fact, made 12.8 times its budget, again, a smaller budget in the case of the first Smile film, and had overall legs of around, let's see if they have that number here. Typically, they usually have the 4.69 multiplier domestic box office versus the biggest weekend. So again, pretty strong holds week to week there for that. So as I mentioned, this is a decent opening for it, at least compared to its budget and compared to the previous film. We'll see how high it is actually going to get. Is it going to make more than this? These are obviously just early projections, and this is just one site's analysis of what they think is going to happen with this movie. The Wild Robot is expected to get the number 2 spot, dropping 28%. As I mentioned, still holding very strong, breaking $100 million, so kudos to them. It is really a beautiful movie, and I would highly recommend it for anyone out there who's looking for something good to see in the theater, because there unfortunately hasn't been a whole lot of options, especially at this part of the year. Wild Robot is a great one. It's a great one to bring your family to as well, and I would definitely recommend it. Terrifier 3, a film that I've not seen, have no intention of seeing. It's just not my cup of tea, but clearly it is the cup of tea of many people, is expected to come in the number 3 spot. Now, what's interesting here, and the reason why I've waited up to this point, is that if you actually compare this to some other charts, the story becomes interesting that there might be a battle for second place between The Wild Robot and Terrifier 3. So according to Box Office Theory, at least, this is a film expected to get third place with a 63% drop. So again, a pretty steep drop, at least compared to what we typically see in most box office films, right? The fact that the third weekend of Joker is getting 63% obviously speaks more to the weakness of Joker and less to the power of Terrifier 3's holds. But this is also not too surprising, obviously, because Terrifier 3 had a very strong organic grassroots campaign, getting a lot of those people out opening weekend to try to show, hey, guess what? You don't need the theatrical system, or rather, sorry, you don't need the Hollywood system. You don't need the Hollywood distribution networks to get your films in theaters to be successful. You can do everything outside of that. You can act independently and be successful. Their opening weekend clearly showed that, and therefore, because of that kind of focus on that opening weekend, it's not surprising to see this projection here. However, Box Office Report has a very different take compared to some of the others on this list. So Box Office Theory has here the 28%, or sorry, the 63% drop. You also then compare that to what you have going on over on Box Office Pro, which has obviously not been as great in recent days ever since Sean Robbins left to do Box Office Theory instead. But they're projecting Smile 2 to open to $15 to $20 million, so actually a little bit worse than the projections on Box Office Theory. Terrifier 3, they expect to get the number 2 spot at $7 to $10 million, so still a second place spot there, but also less than the estimates for what's being given there. And then the Wild Robot to get the number 3 spot at $6 to $10 million, so obviously a battle being there. With, I think, the most bold numbers I've seen so far has been from Box Office Report, because they have obviously that $22.5 million for Smile 2, so there's no denying, that Smile 2 is definitely going to get that number 1 spot. But Terrifier 3, they actually project will only drop 38%. And so if we see Terrifier 3 drop 38%, it's already impressive with its opening weekend. It's already impressive with how it's being distributed, not going through your typical Hollywood channels. It's already impressive being a non-rated movie getting this kind of release as well. The fact that you're also potentially seeing a very strong hold from week 1 to week 2, which is something that most mainstream Hollywood fare, even ones that are well received in general. I mean, you look at, for instance, Transformers 1, people who went to go see that movie liked it, right? That was a very well-received movie. That's a film that a lot of people have been showing a lot of love to. The unfortunate thing is just no one is going to see that. That film had a drop in the 60% range from week 1 to week 2. If Terrifier 3 is actually able to have a percentage drop similar to, or closer to 38%, or being, less than 60%, that I think is also going to be a very impressive feat for a film like it. So kudos to Cineverse, kudos to everyone involved in that project for really making history in many different ways. The Wild Robot on this chart expected to get the number 3 spot at $11.7 million, so even they still would have it as a battle from for first to second place, but they also have the total gross being a little bit higher than what Box Office Theories is. Number 4 spot going to Beetlejuice, continuing to hang around. This film has been very, very impressive now going on into week 7. And then a new film, or at least getting a wider release now, We Live in Time, $3 million projected there, so a massive increase as it is now getting out into more theaters. And then rounding it off is Transformers 1. Joker 2, another big part of this story, 67+% drop in its third week. So not only did it have a historic 81% drop week 1 to week 2, it's now expected to have another massive drop off in week 3. They've also already announced this film availability on VOD, which again this month. So the fact that they are clearly abandoning this movie shows that, yeah, they understand they've got a flop on their hands and they're going to try to make as much money as they can. And the problem is that they spent way too much money on it, and that is just, again, not going to happen, right? and so it's going to be interesting to see. Now, going back to box office theory for a second, all right, just to kind of round off their numbers there, they expect the Terrifier 3 drop to 63%, Beetlejuice at 36%, 63% drop off for Joker, and again, Transformers 1 is still hanging around, but as I mentioned, it cost just a little bit too much, and it ultimately had too weak of an opening to make its money back. Let's go to the charts, because we love charts here on OMB Reviews, just to see what the current state of the numbers actually are. So with The Apprentice, we obviously have in this movie a film that is just not bringing anyone out. The last update on this chart had $2.6 million being made by this movie, and yeah, can't say I'm that surprised when you're not going to really, apparently there are many people defending it as actually a good film, that it's not a hit piece apparently on the former president who is running for office this year, and it happens to conveniently come out like a month before the election. Again, I think that there's just a little bit too many factors there about when this is being released. Maybe that was because they were trying to make the most money and they thought that this would be the most relevant time. Regardless of that, people at Film Threat and other places have defended the film as being actually a decent movie as far as the actual presentation and the performances. I can't say for sure. I just have no interest in seeing it, and clearly most people do not have any interest in seeing it at only making $2.6 million. Piece by Piece is a documentary made by Legos, or made in the form of Legos. This is the story of Pharrell. And so obviously not a movie that was expected to do much anyway, but $5.2 million. I think the marketing campaign for that as a Lego movie probably has helped this film a little bit more. It is still a documentary though, and so that is obviously going to limit its numbers. Terrifier 3 is at $28.0 million. So this film is going to be easily into the $30 to $40 million range as of this weekend. And so again, very impressive numbers there. Let's go ahead and actually see if these numbers are the most up to date. Again, this should auto update in real time. As you can see, Terrifier 3 is also dominating the daily performances there. So yeah, it is listed at $28 million. But actually, let's look at these daily charts here. So just to show you how weak Joker is at number 4. It's only been out for 13 days, being beaten by the 41 days release of Beetlejuice, the 20-day release of The Wild Robot. So yeah, just terrible numbers. But Terrifier 3 also dominating the Discount Tuesday days, Wild Robot also holding well. So as you can see why I think Terrifier 3 is really impressive, but also Wild Robot has a good chance of being successful here as well. And let's go ahead and get into some of those films. So Joker, $225 million in losses right now. I don't suspect that is going to improve. The only saving grace that it has is its international. It's not doing terribly internationally, at least compared to its domestic. It's still not great, though, and it's not going to get to the $800 million international that it did for the first movie. And so it's going to be a flop no matter which market you are in at this point. The question is ultimately going to be how much of a loss is it? Is it going to be a $150 million loss? Is it going to be a $200 million loss? Right now, it's going to be between those numbers there, probably closer to $200 million in losses. So yeah, can't say I'm surprised. Couldn't happen to a worse movie. Megaflopolis, not going to be the biggest flop of the year because of Joker 2, most likely. The Wild Robot, not also going to be a flop, I believe, because right now, $155 million, this film is going to get to $100 million domestically, and that's going to cut off quite a bit in the actual loss calendar. And so I do think that by the end of this weekend, when the domestic internationals come in, it's going to be probably in the 30s range, maybe even in the high 20s range. And I think that this film could leg out, actually, to make its money back. Even if it doesn't, though, it's going to get so close that you're going to have to argue, okay, VOD sales and all the other things like that are going to help that. The Wild Robot, one thing acting against it, it does have I believe this also has recently gotten a VOD release date, so that could have an impact on it. The big difference, of course, being this is a movie that even on VOD was still going to perform well. You look at a film like Beetlejuice, right? This film available on VOD is still performing well at the box office. Wild Robot, I think, will also be one of those movies, and so I don't think it's going to hurt it nearly as much as is the case with a film like Joker 2, for instance. Transformers 1, still at $62 million in the red, as I've mentioned previously. This is a film that obviously has a long way to go to break even, and I don't think that's going to happen theatrically, though I think that it will probably get close enough to where you could argue post-theatrically it could make some money back on VOD sales, Blu-ray sales, things like that. So yeah, maybe they'll end up writing this off as a film that actually made money for them, but on the surface level, it's definitely not going to be anywhere close to a success, and it's a good film. It is a film that I actually liked. Surprisingly, I enjoyed it quite a bit, and so I think that is a movie that probably should be seen, but again, the numbers don't lie, the numbers speak for themselves. But those are the numbers as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts? Let me know your thoughts on any of these films. Do you think that we're going to see Terrifier 3 continue to dominate at the box office, do really well? But also, what do you think about Smile 2? Have you seen it yet? It obviously premiered last night. So let me know your thoughts about that movie, and also what you think the box office totals will be for that film, and also where the Wild Robot falls in the mix as well. Let me know your thoughts about this and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button. Light up that fire button over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with my people on Patreon, Father Luca Illich and Miss Martin Muses. Check out her YouTube channel by the same name, Miss Martin Muses. Also to my Subscribestar people, Matt317. Check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Matt317. And also to the K-Man. Check out his website, xtheboundaries.co. And lastly to my YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Shout out to you, good sir. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to a plethora of other things. You get your name listed at the end of every live stream and video, like you saw in those names that came up before this video started. And also access to a giveaways channel that I host over on the Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Steelbooks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff. So check that out if you're interested in that. Also, I have an exclusive podcast that I hold at least once a month, and it's always a good time, and you get extra bonus content with that also. So if any of that sounds interesting, again, check out that top link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing, and people have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.